Hi, good day everyone. My name is Jadeline Uridoble, and my task is to present to you the competency-based language teaching in China. But before that, let us have a background on what CBLT is, or what they call as the competency-based language teaching. What is CBLT? One of the most popular and accepted approaches in the language learning community is the CBLT approach. This approach focuses on helping learners acquire the competencies they require to communicate effectively in real situations through the various uses of language. It also focuses on what students are able to do with the language rather than they know about it. So in other words, CBLT is designed not around the notion of subject knowledge, but around the notion of competency. And indeed, the mastery of competencies is the key in the CBLT approach. Okay, so under the CBLT approach, the role of the teacher changes from one of being an information giver to a designer of learning experiences. So both the quality and authenticity of such learning experiences are the keys for an effective implementation of this approach. In fact, when designing the curricula, the instructors are required to think first of the set of competencies students are to acquire in each class that will be significant to operate in the real world. In addition, Bogoya in 2000 points out that CBLT involves performance, aptitude, flexibility, and variability. He points to CBLT as a concrete task in a meaningful context that provides a varied solution. Bogoya also points out several components of the CBLT approach. Thus, learners should be able to perform with aptitude and should have the capacity to adapt to the different contexts by autonomously solving problems. And if learners have acquired the competency, they will be able to function in the real world without the teacher's assistance. So if learners can only operate in the safety of the classroom under controlled conditions, then they have not acquired the useful skills. There are characteristics of CBLT, and those characteristics have 4 aspects, and this should be considered when working under this approach. That's according to Williamson in 2007. So the first one is the performance, second is meaningful context, third is autonomous learning, and the fourth one is the problem-solving skills. And in my next slides, I have here some points with regards to competence-based education in China. And in the last few decades, there has been a new widespread of educational movement guided by the language of key competencies, which was developed and elaborated by the OECD, or what we call as the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, EU as the European Union, UNESCO as the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and many countries around the globe. And China is not an exception to this international trend. Historically speaking, competence-based education is not a totally new concept, but actually appeared during the 1950s and 1960s and flourished during the 1970s, aimed at the training of school teachers in America. It was then adopted in the field of vocational education, including teacher education in Canada, the United Kingdom, and other European countries in the 1980s. It gradually declined in the 1990s due to its strong emphasis on the measurement of teachers' behavior justified by behavioral psychology and negligence of the teacher as a whole person. Thus, to say that the current trend of CBE is new actually means many things. So it emerges from a new social, economical, and political atmosphere. Although the new trend of key competence-based education is often criticized for its emphasis on instrumental functions for the implementation of economic and political agenda, the localization of key competences in China introduces the personal, cultural, and social dimensions into the list of the competences, paying considerable attention to the well-being of the children. Hence, it is a great step toward educating for wholeness of the person. After 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded and started to reform the old educational system, the leader of the country, who was Mao Zedong, has pointed out in the early 1950s that education should help the young generation to do well in their study, work, and health, and which is considered as the three good. Directed by Mao's educational ideas in the late 1950s, the central government officially advocated the education for all-round development of the young, which was constituted by moral education, intellectual education, and physical education, aiming at educating the young to be the all-round socialist laborers for China. Chinese government cannot ignore the significance of the notion of key competences that are considered to be essential. Competences are important not only because they're the key to an individual's successful life, but also because they are necessary for maintaining and developing national competitive power on the world stage. So we could really say that competences are given of much importance in Chinese education. So, before we will tackle about the English language teaching approaches in China, first, let's talk about the history of English language in China, or shall we say, how this language came to China. China's first contact with the English language occurred between Chinese and English traders, and the first missionary schools to teach English were established in Macau in the 1630s. And it's between 1911 and 1949, English was popular, and it was taught in missionary schools and 13 Christian colleges. After founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Russian was originally the primary foreign language. English began its transition into the education system during the 1960s as a result of the Sino-Soviet split. Because of the condemnation of the English language during the Cultural Revolution, English education did not return until Richard Nixon, the 37th U.S. President, visited China in 1972. The only textbooks for English instructions were translations of Mao Zedong's works until the Cultural Revolution ended in 1976 and the Gaokao was restored in 1978. By the way, Gaokao in China is a test of a student's academic skills used for admission to colleges and universities. And now let's try to tackle why English was taught in China. In today's globalized world, English has become the language of international communication and has played an increasingly important role in driving China's economic growth and social development. For emerging economies like China, which is playing a growing role in world affairs, the English language is of special significance. Good English proficiency opens doors to greater opportunities and strengthens China's overall international competitiveness. And now, English is a compulsory subject in China's standard national curriculum because English is viewed as an important tool for gaining access to Western science and technology in order to facilitate the four modernizations and as a medium to promote international academic and cultural exchanges as well as a bridge for developing friendship between Chinese people and the people of other countries. Many Chinese students begin learning English at an early age, some even in kindergarten. But in general, they receive their first English lessons in the third grade in primary school. And there are estimated to be around, I think, 400 million Chinese people learning English, larger than the entire population of the United States. And there's also been a clear increase in China's public school international programs that offer English language for Chinese students hoping for overseas education. Now let us talk about the competency-based language teaching in China. China has a lot of different language teaching methods. And in my slides here, I chose only two in which I think these methods are under in the CBLT approach. And now we have here the task-based learning method of English language in China. What is this method all about? So, this method of learning and teaching focused on performing meaningful tasks in the target language, which means that the focus is on using the language to communicate in situations that are either real or at least could have been real. However, it's not a just use the language and you will learn it method. Instead, it's fairly rigorous in that it stresses the importance of both preparing or priming students and following up activities that focus on form, such as vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and so on. And the general principle is function before form, meaning that language is used to communicate and accomplish something first, and that exactly how it's done only comes in later. There are different definitions of a task based on Ellis in 2003, and according to him, each task must focus on meaning, not form. Each task has a gap that needs to be bridged. The students themselves choose how to solve the task, and each task has a goal and related to language learning. Each task must focus on meaning, not form. So, this makes sure that the focus is primarily on communication. The student is not meant to think too much about how something is pronounced or if the word order is correct while engaged in the activity. So it's unlikely that such conscious effort during a communicative task will actually help anyway. Each task has a gap that needs to be bridged. This is essential for any pair or group work in class, but also if you have a tutor or language exchange partner. A gap is simply a difference between what you know and what someone else knows. And to bridge that gap, you need language. The students themselves choose how to complete the task. This means that students themselves use whatever means they have available to solve the task, not just using some list of predefined terms given by the teacher. This is great because it's the way real communication works. Each task has a goal and related to language learning. This is perhaps the most important criteria of all. So, match language learning in classrooms all over the world is done for the sole purpose of language learning. Yes, indeed, that might be the end goal and the reason why you are in class at all, or why you have chosen to learn the language in some other way, but it shouldn't be the immediate focus of activities in the classroom. So, for task-based learning activities, it should reflect real-life situations so the students can see the lesson is relevant to their own lives. And for the communicative language method, it emphasizes on students' needs and encourages students to communicate effectively, which coincides with the educational concept of student-centered advocated by the Chinese Second Curriculum Reform. The communicative approach is based on the idea that learning language successfully comes through having to communicate real meaning. When learners are involved in real communication, their natural strategies for language acquisition will be used, and this will allow them to learn how to use the language. Communicative method includes not only the opportunity to build their speech correctly, but also aims at the understanding of the text, memorizing new vocabulary, and the rules. Classroom activities, guided by the communicative approach, are characterized by trying to produce meaningful and real communication at all levels. As a result, there may be more emphasis on skills than systems. Lessons are more learner-centered, and there may be use of authentic materials. And that would be all. Thank you for watching, everyone.